And the next item of business is topical questions. I will try to get as many people in as possible. First question is to Monica Lennon, who's joining us remotely. Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many people have died after contracting COVID-19 in a hospital, and what action has been taken to investigate outbreaks in NHS settings.
Jean Freeman.
Because of the prolonged incubation period of COVID-19, which can be up to 14 days, it is not possible to be certain exactly how many people have contracted the disease after admission to hospital. However, the Scottish Government is working with UK counterparts and with the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control to establish international definitions for hospital-acquired COVID-19 infections. We will reach those definitions and agree those and publish information about the data that is collected in NHS boards against those definitions in the coming weeks.
Monica Lennon.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. Robust and reliable data on the transmission of COVID-19 in healthcare settings should be in the public domain as soon as possible. And worrying reports have emerged about a major outbreak of COVID-19 at Gartnavel Hospital in Glasgow. Families affected by the outbreak have shared heartbreaking accounts of the loss of loved ones. David Colgan's family were told he would be safe at Gartnavel. After being admitted to the hospital, Mr. Colgan tested negative for COVID. He was, however, later struck down by the virus and died in the hospital alone. His daughter, Mags, has said, the virus blew through the hospital like a draft. What is the Cabinet Secretary's response to the Colgan family and the other families affected by the Gartnavel outbreak?
Jean Freeman.
So my direct response to that family and to other families is to express my condolences to the family for the loss of their loved one and my sympathy to those others who have concern. Gartnavel Hospital, as other hospitals, have three pathways to manage patients. The red pathway, where they know that the incoming patient is a COVID-19 patient. Amber, for contacts where the patient is suspected of having COVID-19. And green for non-COVID-19 patients or patients who have been stepped down from isolation precautions as per the national guidance. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde did initiate a blanket screening policy for all patients every 4 days, broadly consistent with the over 70s testing that we have introduced. However, in any situation, there are two issues here. One is that it is very difficult to know whether someone who is admitted to hospital who may test negative, they test negative at the point when they are tested. That does not mean that they are not incubating COVID-19. My point from earlier about the 14-day incubation period does make it difficult to be absolutely certain in these matters. The second point is that boards and hospitals within boards should have very clear infection prevention and control procedures. And my third point is that Ms Lennon is absolutely right. This is a serious matter and we need to understand as best we can what more it is we need to do in our hospital setting to ensure that we minimise the transmission of COVID within the hospital setting. That's why we're doing that work with that European body and with our counterparts in the other 4 nations of the UK to reach an agreed definition about what it is that we are looking for and counting. It's also why the Chief Nursing Officer's Nosocomio group is due to report back on its recommendations for further actions towards the beginning of next month, and we will take those actions once we have them, but also why the Chief Nursing Officer has instructed to Health Improvement Scotland, Healthcare Inspectorate rather, to begin again its direct inspections in these areas to ensure that proper infection prevention and control measures are in place consistently across all our hospital settings.
Monica Lennon.
Again, I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response. The Gartnavel outbreak does raise questions about the safety of other hospitals and healthcare settings in Scotland. Health Board papers confirm that over 20 ward closures occurred across March and April of this year in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde because of COVID-19 outbreaks. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm the total number of wards which have been closed at, first of all, Gartnavel Hospital and secondly across Scotland as a result of COVID-19 outbreaks during this pandemic? If she can't give the figures today, will she follow that up, please? And given that hundreds of patients, including those who were untested, were discharged into care homes, can the Cabinet Secretary explain what steps have been taken to trace care home residents who were in any of these hospitals where COVID outbreaks occurred, so that action could and can be taken to isolate them and stop the further spread of the virus?
Jean Freeman.
So, as Ms Lennon rightly anticipates, I don't have the exact number in answer to the first part of her question in terms of the numbers of wards that were closed across all our hospital settings. I will secure that number and ensure that she has it as quickly as possible. In terms of her second part of her question, there are two data sets here. There's the discharge data set and the testing data set, both held by Public Health Scotland, in order to be able to respond in a way that we're confident about that data and it is robust. Public Health Scotland are working to bring both of those together. It's not as straightforward as it might sound. It is about ensuring that in bringing them together, the data is comparable, that we're not double counting, we're not underestimating, and we are measuring the same things as far as possible. So NSS, Public Health Scotland, already has that work underway, and as soon as they advise me that they are confident that they have completed that work, they have double-checked the robustness of the data, they're confident about it, then we will publish that data. But as soon as they advise me of that, then I will, of course, make sure that members across the chamber know its publication date and the frequency with which continued publication will be made.
Supplementary from Alison Johnson.
Thank you. Understanding to the best of our ability who, in fact, within that hospital setting has the virus would help minimise transmission within that hospital setting. So can the Cabinet Secretary advise when the Scottish Government will introduce regular routine testing for NHS staff?
Jean Freeman.
So that is currently being considered by both the Chief Medical Officers Advisory Body, that is our advisory body that involves both scientists and clinicians to advise us on what they would see, so that this is advice, we will make the decision, but what they would see as the risk versus benefit in undertaking that. And that's because, as I'm sure the member understands and recalls, there is a debate, continuing debate, around the value of testing individuals who do not have symptoms. At the early part of this pandemic, of course, the advice was that there was no value to testing at all in those circumstances. That has changed in that there is now a lively debate that argues that there is some value, albeit that the test is not as reliable in its results as it is in terms of symptomatic people. It is reliable to a degree. What it tells you, though, is whether or not the individual has the virus on the day of the test. So in order to ensure that you use it for the purposes of prevention and precaution, then it is, as we are doing in care homes, a test that you have to keep repeating every 7 days in order to provide that level of reassurance. So we await that advice and view from that group of individuals, at which point we will take a decision as to whether or not we intend to do that, whether we intend to do it for particular groups or not, whatever the options may be. And at that point, when we've made that decision, then I will, of course, advise members of that.
Question number 2, Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will have recruited all 2,000 contact tracers by the end of May.
Jean Freeman.
We will. As of today, we have 1,615 identified and ready to be deployed, drawn, as the member will recall, from that threefold recruitment exercise from NHS boards, from our returner pool, and of course from the adverts that we had placed, the closing date for which was on Friday. The number I've just given is deployed, are identified and ready to be deployed from NHS boards, from the ambulance service, from NSS and from Public Health Scotland. By June the 1st, we will have over 385 from the NHS returner pool, and we are currently processing those from the recruitment ads at the rate of 150 a day. Of course, as we have said, we do not anticipate that on June the 1st, we will need all of those individuals, because of course contact tracing and the degree to which you need contact tracers is determined by the number of positive tests that come through from individuals. And given that as we move from where we are now, lockdown, to phase 1 as set out in the route map that the government published last week, at this point the incidence of the virus in the community is suppressed, then you would not expect to need all of those 2,000 by any means at the start of phase 1. But our anticipation is that as we move through the phases, depending on how the virus performs and its incidence, then we could need up to 2,000 contact tracers. We could need more. And so we will continue that iterative recruitment exercise over the summer period, as well as what we have achieved to date.
Miles Briggs.
Contact tracers have actually been recruited, because at the statement this lunchtime, the First Minister suggested 700, but have these just been moved from other parts of the government's COVID-19 response? And given the failures we've seen in contact tracing regarding the night conference at the beginning of this outbreak, what lessons have been learned and what additional measures have been taken into account with this new system?
Jean Freeman.
So let me repeat. As of today, we have 1,615 staff identified and ready to be deployed. Now, as the member will recall, I have said from the outset on social media and elsewhere that our recruitment exercise for contact tracers is threefold. NHS staff, remembering that we're starting from having a pool of contact tracers through those local health protection teams, which expand or contract depending in pre-pandemic, depending on what we needed them to do. From NHS staff, we are then adding to that the second pillar, if you like, of that recruitment exercise is our NHS returner pool. And then we had the adverts that closed on Friday of last week. So that is the threefold way by which we were growing that number of contact tracers, with an estimate that we needed 2,000. We will have those 2,000 by the 1st of June. In terms of contact tracing and how that exercise works, what happened around the event that the member has referenced is exactly the way contact tracing works. First Minister has already explained the process that was gone through. Remember, contact tracing and all of this exercise is an NHS clinically led exercise. And so there are protocols around that. And one of the areas that is being discussed at this point is what is the size of, what number of cases would constitute a cluster, and having agreed that, not yet agreed, led by our DCMO and our Chief Medical Officer and others, once that is determined and agreed, the number of cases that would constitute a cluster, the other part of the advice that they will bring forward about how they want to proceed is what would then trigger a public health notice to a community that a cluster had appeared in a particular setting. And once those two decisions have been made by those individuals, then we will make sure that members know what those are.
Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. More than 100,000 tests have been left unused in Scotland during the outbreak, as the daily target falls short on a consistent basis. Does the Cabinet Secretary accept that the current situation around testing hasn't been acceptable and that care home staff and residents who should have been tested haven't actually been able to utilise this capacity? And the Cabinet Secretary told me previously that it is taking between 48 and 72 hours for people to receive their test results. What will the turnaround time be under this new testing system? And if it's not below 24 hours, does the Cabinet Secretary actually think the system will work?
Jean Freeman.
So I think I would dispute Mr Briggsy's figures. I think I heard those from the Herald newspaper, and we disputed those at the time. If he would like to, after this session, provide me with the detail of how he arrived at that number, I would be happy to give him a detailed answer. In terms of his second part of the question about the turnaround time, what I said, if I recall correctly, is that it was up to 72 hours, and where we were pressing hardest to have that turnaround time reduced was actually the Lighthouse Lab, which is part, of course, of that four-nation UK government-led exercise. 24 hours is the target time to bring the tests in terms of sample to result within 24 hours. Our NHS labs are achieving that. The Lighthouse Lab, I'm very pleased to say, is very close to consistently achieving that too. And one of the other areas that our clinical advisors to the health service will also determine is how that will be monitored in order to ensure that that 24-hour target time is consistently met across all the lab sites that are operating.
Question number 3, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government what guidance is available to help and support the well-being of people affected by COVID-19.
Aileen Campbell is joining us remotely.
Thank you. To ensure individuals are aware of the help and support available to them, we have provided key information on both Ready Scotland and a new information page on mygov.scot. We've also worked with key partners, including local and national and third sector organisations and local authorities, to strengthen the support available and provided guidance on supporting shielded individuals. We launched a new helpline on the 14th of April to ensure that everyone who needs help and cannot get it from friends, families or others nearby can access it. We wrote to every household in Scotland to make them aware of the help and support that is available.
James Dornan.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but many people will be facing challenges in accessing and affording food and other essentials during this crisis. Can the Cabinet Secretary maybe outline in more detail how the Scottish Government will ensure that people receive the support they need in a dignified way?
Aileen Campbell.
Yeah, absolutely, and we are unique across the UK in trying to take a cash-first approach to food insecurity, and that's the most dignified way to provide support founded on the principles of human rights, and that's why we have more than doubled the national budget for the Scottish Welfare Fund and have given local authorities the flexibility to provide their allocation of the 30 million food fund support as cash or vouchers where appropriate. 60 million of the 70 million food fund is directed at a structured public sector response to support food access, and that includes 30 million for the National Shielding Programme and 30 million to local authorities for others who are at risk. And a further 10 million of the food fund is going to the third sector partners delivering community-based responses and supporting community fund, and the Wellbeing Fund are also supporting community food provision. So there's a range of different approaches that we're taking to ensure that we can access, people can access food and find the support they need it where they need it.
James Dornan.
Okay, thanks for that as well. Further to that reply though, can the Cabinet Secretary provide details and how it is ensuring people are informed and access the financial support that's available, whether it's UK reserve benefits such as universal credit or Scottish Government support such as the Scottish Welfare Fund you just mentioned, or self-employed grants?
Aileen Campbell.
Okay, yeah, we continue to promote uptake of the wide range of support available, including through our partners in Citizen Advice Scotland. In 2020-21, we're providing Citizen Advice Network in Scotland with 3 million to provide support to people affected by poverty and welfare reforms, helping everyone in Scotland who is struggling financially at this time, and that includes an additional £100,000 from the Wellbeing Fund to support their COVID-related pressures, including the new national helpline. And we also provide funding for welfare advice to One Parent Family Scotland, Child Poverty Action Group, and Advice Direct Scotland. And that funding covers both direct advice to people seeking assistance, as well as training, support and second-tier advice given to other advice agencies across Scotland. So again, a number of different ways in which we're trying to help people cope financially, and undoubtedly there'll be future pressures that will need to continue to be agile on this issue.
Supplementary from Alec Rowley.
Officer, it was actually the first question that I pushed my button on.
Oh, there seems to have been an issue with our screens up here, but so you don't have a supplementary. That's fine, we'll move on. Okay, question number 4, John Finney. And John Finney is joining us remotely, as is the Cabinet Secretary, who will respond. John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the Specialist Leisure Group entering administration, resulting in 7 hotels across Scotland ceasing to trade, what further steps is considering to support the tourism industry?
Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was very sorry to learn of the administration of the Specialist Leisure Group, and our thoughts are with the several large number of employees in Scotland and throughout the UK who are directly affected. The Scottish Government has done a great deal to support tourism businesses in these most difficult times. In particular, we've provided very substantial financial support. Tomorrow, Presiding Officer, I will be speaking, I think, for the 6th occasion with Nigel Duddleston, my UK counterpart. I will be pressing him that the many businesses, particularly rural hotels in Scotland, with rateable values in excess of 51,000, have had no grant support from the UK government scheme. And I believe it's not too late for the UK government to put right that defect if they wish. And I very much hope that the UK Treasury will listen to that very carefully if we are able to help businesses such as those bridge the gap through these troubled times. In addition, I want to ensure that relaxations to the furlough scheme are flexible enough to assist businesses in Scotland and meet their needs. And finally, Presiding Officer, it's vital that we enable businesses in the tourism sector to resume as soon as they can safely do so. And a great deal of our effort at the current time is devoted to that vital task. Thank you.
John Finney.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that detailed response? The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that this current crisis has also created an extremely difficult environment for coach operators. Specialist Leisure Group included the Caledonian travel brand, for instance. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what discussions he's undertaken with coach operators about the long-term sustainability of the industry, given these current challenges, and have these discussions included the role these operators could play in school transport when schools return after the summer break?
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, yes, I have, and yes, we will. I have had a lengthy discussion with a number of coach operators, including representatives of the trade body, the CPT. Most of them who operate in the tourism sector operate exclusively in the tourism sector. Some of them also work for education authorities, local authorities, in providing school transport. So it is possible, as I think Mr. Finney's question implies, that in future, some of these coaches, at least for an interim period, could be helping out with school or indeed public transport, not least because, as I understand it, working closely with my colleague, the Transport Secretary, Michael Matheson, the requirements of social distancing mean that bus transport means that only a very small proportion of the seats will be used, thereby meaning that more buses will be required. So I think Mr. Finney has made a very practical point, if I have interpreted correctly, and if so, it is one that we are interested in pursuing and working with the member as all members, as we do.
John Finney.
Yes, I'm very grateful for the Cabinet Secretary for confirmation of that important role that the coaching sector could play. Can I ask, in general terms, Cabinet Secretary, in relation to all these engagements, is there a role for the STUC in ensuring that any support that the government does provide underpins the fair work agenda?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, yes, we have always worked very closely with the STUC, and myself over the years have valued their counsel and their involvement in ensuring that the work arrangements are fair to employees. And this is another example of that. And I think they too will be concerned, as I am, that the UK government hasn't yet come up with a bespoke scheme to provide assistance for the coach sector, who are so important for the tourism sector overall. After all, if people can't get to Scotland to visit our hotels, if they can't get from cruise liners to see visitor attractions, if they can't be used to collect visitors from the airports or railway station to their onward destination, it's going to make the task of resuming our successful tourist industry that much the harder.
I have a few supplementary requests, so it would be good if people could be succinct. And I have Willie Rennie, who will be followed by Rachel Hamilton.
The tourism sector is very anxious that the Scottish Government won't continue the financial support that's so far been provided, even though it advises it remains closed during the very important summer season. So can I ask the Minister whether more financial support will be available from the Scottish Government if it advises that the sector does remain closed?
Fergus Ewing.
I think Mr Rennie makes a very important point. I understand my colleague Kate Forbes will be making or Fiona Hislop will be making a statement later this afternoon. I expect that may be of interest to the member. But we certainly in the Scottish Government realise that the job we have, which is to provide a financial bridge through this period of difficulty, is not yet complete. That bridge is under construction. It's not finished. And we need to continue to work in a non-partisan way with the UK Government on these matters, recognising that the bridge isn't yet complete. And that means, I think in particular, the furlough scheme, Presiding Officer, needs to be extended, I think, beyond October. And indeed, just this morning, I spoke to a group of North Highland hoteliers, and the single issue which they said was most important to enable their survival was a more flexible furlough scheme, which would allow them options to navigate through to Easter next year, especially if, as is the case at the moment, there is uncertainty as at the current time as to whether or not there will be any chance of a summer season for hotels this year. So it is absolutely essential that we approach in an open-minded fashion and a non-political, non-partisan fashion the need to provide that support. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we will see more examples of the sad administration of one leading company, Shearings, followed by others. So this couldn't be more important. And I very much hope that the UK Government will be of the same view.
Rachel Hamilton, to be followed by Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I draw members' attention to my register of interests? Cabinet Secretary rightly points out furloughing from the UK Government has been a lifeline to the tourism industry. I ask the Cabinet Secretary, will the Scottish Government create a bespoke scheme for tourism and hospitality businesses fighting for their survival and not eligible for the £10,000 grant, the £25,000 grant, the Creative and Tourism Hardship Fund, or the Pivotal Enterprise Resilience Fund?
Fergus Ewing.
I've been absolutely open from the outset, Presiding Officer, that our job is to provide a financial support mechanism to all legitimate tourism businesses. And I don't mean Airbnbs here. I don't mean second homeowners who make a bit of money on the side. I mean genuine businesses who rely for their main livelihood on tourism now have no business. So it's the government's business to keep them going. So I have consistently argued this, and that follows it follows automatically from that, Presiding Officer, that, for example, bed and breakfasts establishments, the photographers, that those involved in field sports, amusement arcades, marinas, small boat owners who may not have been eligible for the original grant scheme require other forms of support. That work is ongoing. I suggest that the member listens carefully to the statement this afternoon, where I hope further information will be forthcoming. I can absolutely assure her that I support the principle which she has set out. Absolutely. I just hope that, you know, in the UK government treasury, this is not regarded as a box which now has occupying within it a tick. There is no tick in this box, and it's our job to complete the bridge, to complete the task, and that's what we're determined to do, Presiding Officer. Thank you.
And the last question is from Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding. The Bay Waverley Castle Hotel, a 77-bedroom hotel in Melrose, part of the Bay Hotel Group. Staff living on site have been given 28 days notice to find alternative accommodation, so they're jobless and homeless in one blow. What assistance can the Scottish Government, perhaps liaising with the local authority, give to those particular members of staff?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I'm not aware of this particular case, Presiding Officer. Christine Graham has drawn it to my attention and thereby to the public attention. I will ask my officials to look into this straight away. Obviously, it is of concern that during this period in particular, people will face eviction from their property, but I don't know the individual circumstances, and I will, of course, undertake to work with the member if she wishes me to do so, to look into this matter and see what can be done to help the individuals who are now in an extremely invidious position.
That concludes topical questions, and we'll move on to the next item of business.